Good Erev Shabbos. So, Yitzchak Meir of Mishbush um, was the son of the great of Abraham Yeshua Heschel, Abt, uh, founder of the Hasidic dynasty. So he was his son, Yitzchak Meir, and he was a Hasidic rabbi in his own right in the early 20th century. But less well known than the rabbi himself was his wife, Rebbetzin Merle, who was known for her piety. And the story goes that she was once davening in shul when she heard a commotion on the men's side of the mechitza, in the men's section, and so she crossed over to where the men were to hear what had happened. What were people talking about? And so the men informed her that Reb Yaakov, the local wagon driver, had passed away. And one might have expected her not to have much of a reaction. He was another simple Jew in the town. But instead she gasped in shock and anguish and proceeded to tell the men of Rabbi Yaakov's greatness. There was that freezing day some years back, she recalled, when she was left with no firewood to light the fire in her and her husband's house for warmth. And Rabbi Yaakov, the wagon driver, immediately upon hearing this, went out to the forest and came back with a whole wagon full of wood, just for her, enough for her to even light an additional fire in the Beit Midrash, in the study hall, so that the students could learn Torah in comfort. When Rebbetzin Merle once ran out of water to use for cooking for Shabbos, and she couldn't make whatever she was cooking, chicken soup, whatever it was, Rabbi Yaakov was the one who went out and he came back with a huge barrel full of water for her to use. And these actions of kindness showed to her that he was the kind of person whose passing should not be taken lightly or forgotten. And one of the most salient messages of the Parsha that we'll read tomorrow in Nitzavim is the inclusivity of the Torah. The fact that the Torah belongs equally to all Jews regardless of their military rank, gender, age, ethnicity, social status, or profession. The Torah says, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lefnei Hashem Elokeichem. You are standing today, all of you, before Hashem your God. Rashechem, Sheptechem, Ziknechem, Shodrechem. That includes, sure, the heads of your tribes and the elders and the officers, Kol Ish Yisrael, every Israelite man. But it also includes Tabachem and Shechem, Gerchasher, Bekar Machanecha, Mechotev, Itzacha, Ad Torei Memecha. It includes children, obviously includes women, includes strangers in the midst of your camp, from the wood chopper to the water drawer. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the stories about Rabbi Yaakov include both of those professions, chopping wood and drawing water. The idea that the Torah, the law, culture, and history of the Jewish people does not only belong to the elite, but rather is the property of each individual Jew, was revolutionary at the time that the Torah was given. Because not only were we to understand that all people are created in the image of God, but that within the Jewish people there may be different roles for Kohanim, Leviim, for priests and Levites, for different groups of Jews, but they were not any more part of the covenant than anyone else. All Jews, wherever they're stationed, are equally part of the same breed and owners of the same Torah. But the Torah itself actually goes even further, extending the covenant to people who were not even present for its affirmation, for the giving of the Torah and its reaffirmation before they entered the land of Israel. V'lo itchem levadchem anochi karit et habrit hazot, et hala hazot. And it's not with you alone that I am making this covenant and this curse. Ki et asher yeshno po imanu hayom, omid hayom lefnei Hashem Elokeinu. Rather, it applies to those who are here with us, standing today before Hashem our God, and to those and it also applies to those who are not here with us today. the commentators ask the obvious questions about this passage. First of all, who are these people who missed the covenant, who weren't present? And second, how can a covenant be made with people who are not present to consent to it? And many of these commentators who ask these questions, such as the Maharal of Prague, point out that those who are not here with us today cannot be referring to living Jews who missed the meeting at the time, because Moshe explicitly says, "Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem," right? They're all standing there before Hashem. Instead, Rashi and many others suggest that Moshe is saying that the covenant would apply not only to those who were physically standing before him, but also to generations yet unborn. The Midrash states that the intent of the pasuk is to include the souls of future generations in the covenant, to assert that they too were present to agree to the terms of the brit with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with God. Even these unborn future generations, these still yet to be born people. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains that obligations and responsibilities are not always things that we consciously and actively choose for ourselves. Much of what makes us who we are and what gives us meaning to our lives, those things fall on us because of decisions made and actions taken by past generations. But the fact that that's the case does not make these obligations and responsibilities any less ours, any less meant for us. And if anything, this fact should cause us to be even more careful with what we do now, knowing how what we do now will affect our descendants and generations after them. In 1783, upon the occasion of the disbanding of the Continental Army, General George Washington wrote a letter to the governors of the former colonies and newly independent United States. And before stating his vision for what the new federal government should look like in order for the nascent country to succeed, Washington similarly noted how their actions at that time in the late 1700s would affect future generations and whether the American Revolution be considered for them, for those future generations, a blessing or a curse. He wrote, "For according to the system of policy the states shall adopt at this moment, they will stand or fall, and by their confirmation or lapse, it is yet to be decided whether the revolution must ultimately be considered as a blessing or a curse. A blessing or a curse not to the present age alone, but for with our fate, will the destiny of unborn millions be involved." Sivan Rav Meir adds that those who are not here with us this day includes not only future generations, but past generations, our ancestors as well. She cites a story from the modern state of Israel's earliest days when David Ben-Gurion was considering a partition plan that had been proposed by the international community. And Ben-Gurion asked a prominent Zionist politician and the founder of the kibbutz movement, Yitzhak Tabenkin, to give him advice as to whether to accept this offer. The next day, Tabenkin told Ben-Gurion that he had consulted with two people and came to the decision to advise Ben-Gurion to refuse to accept the proposal. And when Ben-Gurion asked him who were these two people, Tabenkin replied, they are my grandfather who died 10 years ago and my grandson who is not yet born. In other words, like Tabenkin, Moshe wanted the Jewish people to appreciate the covenant that they were accepting included not only themselves with all their diversity, but would also impact all who came after them, and even those who came before them. Rav Soloveitchik, in several of his writings and talks, provides yet another take on the intent behind this verse. He argues that Moshe is not only cautioning the Jewish people about how the covenant will affect other generations. Rather, he says, Moshe was informing them about how the covenant transforms the relationship between the Jewish people at present and their ancestors and descendants. For us, the past is not completely severed from us, is not dead and buried. Studying the Torah of the past is not archaeology, it's not merely academic. It is engaging in an ongoing conversation with the past, a symposium of generations between Jews of all times. Those who are not here with us this day can be considered part of the covenant because, in this sense, Torah transcends time We are meant to feel like all Jews, past, present, and future, are part of one timeless community. Of Avram Lieberman, in his book Zer Avram Oravi, provides a clever reading of the pasuk that supports this idea. When the Torah says, "Ki asher yeshna po imanu, omed hayom lifnei Hashem Elokeinu, vet asher einenu po imanu hayom," most people translate it to mean, rather, the covenant also includes those who are here with us standing today before Hashem our God, and those who are not here with us today. Rav Lieberman suggests that perhaps we should read it as follows. Either those who are here with us who are here standing today before Hashem our God are with us, and so too those who are not here today with us, are not here today, are with us too. Today, Friday, is September 11th, the 19th anniversary of the attacks on the United States of America by foreign terrorists that led to the deaths of almost 3,000 Americans. As a New Yorker, this day has always had special meaning for me because I remember the feeling of fear that day in 2011 when I learned of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center, the terror that I felt that perhaps something had happened to my parents, who at the time both worked in Manhattan. Thank God, both of my parents were safe, but many others, including a firefighter from my hometown, did not make it home. Despite the vivid memories of 9/11 that most people in my generation have, in the past 2 decades, time has allowed us to begin to forget. Our memories of the unity that our nation felt on that day and in the weeks and months afterward are fading, and we are now more divided than we've ever been, at least in recent memory. Moreover, the death and devastation wreaked by the current pandemic in the past 6 or 7 months, with over 190,000 Americans and almost 1 million people worldwide dead from the novel coronavirus, 9/11 feels like it has been in some ways overshadowed. It is hard to think about those who are not here with us today from the past when we are collectively suffering so much in the present. But perhaps the Torah is teaching us something important that will help us overcome this effect. Past generations are never really gone, not in our view. The sacrifices made by firefighters, medics, emergency workers, police officers, the sense of compassion and kindness that pervaded New York on that day, those actions demand something from us today. They are in conversation with us. Our obligation to remember 9/11 is not only to feel nostalgia and to relive the sadness, it is to remind ourselves of a day when Americans and human beings in general showed the goodness that we are capable of. The legacy of those who perished that day, especially the first responders, is still with us, even while they are not here, calling on us to live up to our potential, to be just as compassionate and kind and selfless on our best days as on our worst. In my mind, the actions of those 9/11 heroes are echoed by the frontline healthcare professionals and essential workers who made and who are making parallel extraordinary efforts to save lives and keep our society functional during this pandemic. On this solemn day of 9/11, we all need to listen to the silent voices of those heroes who perished on that terrible day or in the years following it, to understand that even though they are not physically here anymore, they are very much still with us, setting an example for us in yet another crisis. May their memories be a source of blessing and inspiration to us today and always. I want to wish you a safe and enjoyable Shabbos.